Tēnā koutou katoa, e ngā manuhiri tēnā koutou. E te hao kainga e tau nei, tēnā koutou. Ko Ruth Cooper tako wingoa, ko ao te kai whakahaere o Media Design School. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. My name is Ruth Cooper, and I'm the Country Director at Media Design School, and I welcome you this evening to our panel talk on the topic of digital transformation and what it can do for your business. As Media Design School launches New Zealand's first Master of Digital Transformation program next month, the aim of this korero is for us to explore how digital technologies and tools are transforming the way New Zealand businesses and organisations are not only navigating, surviving, but also growing in what is a very challenging and increasingly global market. What are these digital technologies? Well, many I'm sure you will have heard of before. I'm not sure how much you might know about them, hence the reason for this panel. Where they include agile mindset, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and of course things like the Internet of Things and user experience. So this evening, we're really lucky. We've actually got some amazing business leaders from IBM and from Salesforce and Datacom. And they're actually here to share with you their insights on digital transformation, but also to talk about the practical applications of some of these technologies. We are going to have a Q&A at the end. And if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's a tab called Questions. If you pop your questions in there, we will save some time towards the end of the session to answer those questions. And I'll be coming to the panel members for that. So kicking this off, really wanted to introduce you to these three incredible guys who have joined us this evening. First of all, I'd like to welcome Rory Walker. Rory is the Strategic Account Director at Salesforce. Hi, Rory. I wonder if I can ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Sure, thanks, Ruth, and what a pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. Kia ora. So as Ruth mentioned, I'm a Strategic Account Director at Salesforce. I look after a number of our large enterprise customers, currently in banking, but I've worked across most parts of the enterprise business-to-business selling spectrum in the last 20 years, and now a complete devotee of digital transformation and all the benefits that that brings to both employees and customers. Thanks, Ruth.
So, I have to ask the question because digital transformation is a word that we know is used quite a lot, and it does seem to mean different things to different people. I wonder if I can ask you, Rory, how would you define digital transformation?
Yeah, and I guess this might create some discussion and debate between the three of us in the panel as well, and probably everyone in the chat feed too. So I guess I would go back a second. So way back in the sort of the mid-2000s, I worked at New Zealand Post, and digital at that point had sort of morphed from being a notice board or an account balance into really what was a channel. So digital was typically then an online sales channel, and that's where it really started as a discipline in its own right. And at that point, it was all about websites, really. And then, of course, the iPhone came along and it started to be about apps as well. And so, those were the days when digital was that kind of a channel, whereas now digital is really a way of working. It's not a channel, it's how the whole organization has to be. And if one thing the pandemic or now endemic has really taught us is that we've got to, as organizations, be able to operate as seamlessly in a digital way as we do in a physical way. So it's really, for me, the process then of bringing together business technology and digital seamlessly, both as functions and as technologies, and blending them in a digital and physical way that's effective to create great customer and employee experiences.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to also welcome Midu. Midu Chandra is the head of Datacom Foundry Australia and New Zealand at Datacom. I have to say I wasn't very clear on what Foundry meant, so maybe you can explain that to us when you introduce yourself, Midu.
Yes. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thank you, Ruth, very much. Midu Chandra. I have the privilege of working at Datacom, and I guess For those of you who don't know it, it's a New Zealand technology company. So I think, that's really, really exciting. And the part that I get to play is I work in a team called the Foundry, which generally, so I guess just to explain what it does is it works with customers who want to transform. And equally, it's also an opportunity for us to look at ourselves internally and look at what we do in that sort of space. Bit of background on me is some Indian by origin, but I was born in Zambia, Central Africa. So don't mistake that with Zimbabwe or South Africa, which is cool. Then I moved to New Zealand, and then then I left New Zealand, worked in Australia for a really long time, and then I've been back for the last 4 years, and it's been pretty awesome. Even though we're in the times where we are, it's really good to be back home.
Excellent. I'm going to ask you the next question, and that is, I want to know what you think digital transformation is for you.
Yes, and I mean, I know that we're supposed to argue, Rory, but I want to start with that. But I guess from my perspective, I guess the way I kind of like to describe it is, often it's at least a 3 to 5 year journey. I think also equally 25, it only succeeds 25% of the time, and that's why we've got to keep trying. And I think ultimately, if you look at it, it's a method, it's a tool set, it's a culture, and really it comes in 3 core parts. And hopefully I can share some stories around that. And those 3 core parts is, protect your core business, ignite new growth channels, and then, if you can, and you're in that sort of space, how do you disrupt your industry and reimagine your business? And I think, that's all the exciting stuff. And that's what I love about New Zealand is we have such a strong creative powerhouse that those are the aspects we can look at. And I think, if we just look back at the last 20 months or 19 months, however you want to categorize it, we're all going through the biggest digital transformation course the world's ever seen. So yeah, that's my answer.
Excellent. I was talking to Midu before, and we were talking about Media Design School shifting its 800 students to a learning platform, and that's certainly digital transformation over the last 20 or so months. Really happy to welcome along Ian Hulme. Ian Hulme is the Business Transformation Service Lead at IBM. Ian's actually had quite a history with Media Design School, so it's lovely to welcome onto the panel. I wonder if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Ian.
Tēnā koe, Ruth. I hope it's been a good history, Ruth. And
it's all good.
I just wanted to pick up on what Midu said earlier about picking fights with one another. I'll pick a fight. You guys have already stolen what I wanted to say. But yeah, by trade, I'm what we call a business designer. So I use human-centered design, a real focus on business outcomes to help reimagine client organizations and how they're experienced by employees or customers or the citizens that they serve. And sometimes it's using the cognitive technologies like we're going to talk about tonight. Sometimes it's working with people like Salesforce and Datacom and the cloud platforms that they have at their disposal. And it's a really good time to be in the industry. This is my second time in tech. I studied a very long time ago and was a programmer originally, and then I got out as a lot of other industries saw what was happening with digital. But now I'm back. I'm really enjoying it. I'm pretty encouraged too by the amount of people entering into the industry and the different perspectives that they bring.
That's great. So in terms of digital transformation, nothing more to add, or have these two defined it perfectly for you, Ian?
Or maybe I might be a bit provocative.
There you go. Off you go.
I do agree that everyone's on their own journey, right? In terms of starting with different things. They might be experimenting with AI and chatbots or moving workloads to the cloud. And they could rightfully argue that when they use AI and chatbots, they're transforming their customer experience or the employee experience to ultimately serve someone better. I guess the kind of challenge with that is how do you go beyond these random acts of digital into something that's a little more orchestrated, something that's more sustainable. And as Rory was alluding to, it's this continuous adaptation to a changing environment. So, I think once you've got like an operating model in place, you've got your cultural mindset shift from moving away from things like delivering technology with product features to focusing on the end user and stuff as an example, and embracing new ways of working, then you'll start to truly see transformation, and that's innovation at speed and at scale.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And look, I'm going to come to Midu. One of the things that would be really great for us is to hear a little bit more about some of these digital technologies and tools. I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking to some of them, and are there some examples you can share with us to give us some clear idea in terms of what they're all about?
Yeah, okay, sure. I mean, I think, when we talk about tools, I guess we've got, some of the tangible sort of stuff. So we're talking about AI, machine learning, and, I think that can be really great at making your business a little bit more efficient and really playing more into the core sort of space. And then I think when you start getting into more of that, what we call disruptive or transformational sort of space, then we can start looking at, what's the role of blockchain and that sort of thing. But I think the best way to kind of describe it is, over the last couple of years, one of my favorite customers that I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but Kiwi success story, did a lot of work with Silverfern Farms, and they've been looking at how they reimagine their supplier experience. And so then when you start pulling out your digital transformation toolkit, I know the guys will talk about some other aspects as well, then you start looking at, well, okay, cool, we can look at customer experience, user experience, right? Because as soon as you start going, how am I going to reimagine my supplier experience, then you got to pull out your design thinking, your system thinking sort of toolkit to go, okay, what actually makes supplier experience? And if if we're saying that's to make farmers' jobs easier, then what does that actually mean? And what does Silverfern Farms play in that part? So then I think, if we take it back to the protect your core business, well, first and foremost, as they wanted to start going about making that supplier experience better, we actually have to start looking at, okay, are they going to stay on premises with everything they're doing, or are they actually going to move to cloud technologies, and what's the usefulness and the business application that kind of lies within that? I think from there, then, where I've spent most of my life is in then creating new digital sort of channels. And ultimately, I think what we started talking about was, or what they wanted to achieve was loyalty. So then if we start talking about how do you form loyalty with farmers, it has to come back to, I just need to know that I'm getting a fair price for something that I'm providing to you and you're on selling for me. How do we do that? So then I think when you look at your digital toolkit, you start looking at, well, AI, machine learning, as well as how do we actually start making the data a bit more real time, but make that really easy. So it's something that farmers who are out in the field can just click, touch, it's there. And then I think, when you start talking about what's going to disrupt and allow us to stop being a commodity and talk more about the value we provide, then you start going into this whole area of agriculture around provenance, or telling the story of where your product comes for, the farmers are the rock stars. And that's again where, AI, machine learning, blockchain kind of comes into it. So I think, when you start pulling that, and it's just how I think all of these things, it's all around how they actually interlink together. So I hope I've answered your question.
Well, actually, it's interesting because you use these terms, and I'm sitting there going, now, remind me what machine learning is. Could you, for those of us who are listening, can you just tell us just a little bit more about what machine learning is?
Okay, so this is where I think I get shut down by lots of people, right? Because everyone kind of has their own interpretation around this stuff.
We're looking for your definition. You go for it.
As the simpleton that I am, and don't quote it. It's not going to go. It's not going to go on the net. But I guess machine learning is essentially where if we're collecting lots and lots of data, we can actually use the machine to then drive a lot of insights for us if we've got the right sort of model that's there, right? It's not actually going and we've created a model. It's actually going through it. It's actually understanding what that is, and it's helping us derive some insight. But it's not actually going and learning by itself and then telling us what's the next thing. And so I think, for me, in its simplest form, that's where it kind of goes. And maybe that's where we start having a little bit of a discussion around that definition, if the guys have a different way to explain it.
Nothing else to add? Looks like you're the expert on machine learning there, Midu.
I think I'm the simpleton. So there you go.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, look, Rory, I want to come to you because I know that cloud computing and agile are two of the areas that you talk about a lot. Can you tell us what they are?
Sure can, and the only reason I'm not jumping in on the back of Midu's comments is I agree that machine learning and artificial intelligence are possibly two of the more contentious things to try and describe. Definitely, everyone has their own flavour. So Ruth, thanks. Good question. So cloud computing, term used all over the place. I'm going to try and explain these things without buzzwords. I'm more of a business person than a technologist, so that plays to my strength. But simply put, cloud computing is accessing data centers at a massive scale that have got internet access. And there are lots of brands out there that people will know really well, and some have recently announced their pending arrival here in the New Zealand market. So AWS and Azure have both confirmed that they're going to bring data centers into New Zealand. They're known as public cloud. And so if anyone hears the term public cloud, that's what that refers to. Google Cloud is the other big one. And if you're in China, Alibaba is probably the big equivalent there. You might also hear those described as hyperscalers. Again, all that's saying is that they can access volumes of bandwidth, storage, speed of access that an individual company could never afford in its own right. So really for any company, as Midu and Ian were talking about, that are looking to digitally transform, cloud computing is fundamental to it, because it gives the company access to capabilities they could never afford and couldn't probably build themselves. And some great examples out there, you know, in terms of that kind of massive, secure, scalable platform that you get with cloud. You know, there was a bank, I think I can say their name, it was NAB in Australia, talked about moving 1,000 apps in 1,000 days onto public cloud. And those are the kind of the bold statements that big digital transformers like to make, because it gives a bit of a rallying cry for everyone. And in fairness, they made that statement several hundred days ago, and we haven't heard very much about it since then, so I don't know how they're going. But I think the key point is that you know, this is, and Ian talked about moving workloads onto the cloud. This is about taking either existing applications from your own servers on premise and putting them into public or private cloud, or it's potentially using digital transformation to make a decision. Do we actually want to reuse this existing app over here, or do we want to do it in a different way? And that might be that they actually want to use software as a service to solve the problem, as opposed to a bespoke app that they might have built themselves. And I think that's a real key thing that anyone going through your program would understand at the end, or at least understand the right question to ask, which is the right thing to do here to build a new app, use software as a service, or repurpose an old one? Those would be some of the key things that someone looking at that would do. And then to answer the second part of the question around agile, you know, it's a way then of doing that work. So again, agile's probably got even more buzzwords than in any other topic on this conversation, and it's liberally used by people who have no idea what it means. And lots of people who do know what it means as well. You know, there's lots of organizations that say they do agile, but there aren't actually that many organizations that are agile. And in New Zealand, we've seen this across the enterprise, that the big end of town are training people to do agile, but very few of them actually are agile. They're still using techniques that have been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, typically called waterfall. So literally you go step by step by step by step, whereas in an agile program, you should be going step, 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 step in parallel. Most organizations still struggle to do this well, particularly when it comes to funding. And so if there's anyone on the call that's a product owner or a product manager, they'll be rolling their eyes and laughing at that, because, you know, trying to get funding to line up with an agile delivery program in a big enterprise is hard work, because the people that hold the money want to see this before they release any more money. So, you know, in practice though, agile is very much about small, multi-skilled teams with people from, whether it's sales, marketing, technology, integration, risk, assurance, you name it, whoever you need to have in the team, you should have someone from that team in the team, and they can make decisions discreetly to achieve a bigger goal, and they're probably going to do it in sprints. A sprint is just a term for a 1, 2, maybe even 3 or 4 week block of work. And then there's a whole new language of how you actually do things to get work into that and out of that. I'm not even going to go there. That's another topic altogether.
Well, there you go. So look, I wanted to come across to Ian, because Midu was talking about AI before, And I wonder if I can get you to talk a little about AI and blockchain, which are two terms that we hear a lot of. One of the things that's interesting is I wonder if everyone is actually aware of just how much AI there is in our environment these days. So can you tell us a little bit more about those technologies and maybe just some really good examples of where we might have come across things like AI and blockchain in our day-to-day environment?
Yeah, I think AI has become quite pervasive. I think it was one of the earlier cognitive technologies that people took a real liking to. And I think, as Rory was saying, you started to see this emerge in platforms that most of us use every day. Social media networks like Facebook, for example, and with very simple chatbots that they introduced. And so you saw more and more brands wanting to be a part of that and see if they can lighten the load on their workforce, especially if they outsource the resourcing of these channels. I think what's really interesting is that if you take the call center, for example, most of us will feel that we're being deflected away from a phone call to a chatbot to see if that can answer our question first. But there's also the use of chatbots internally for the employee experience as well. And, they're looking to try and help people that may be new to a role because, turnover is quite high in a call center, get up to speed quickly and also be able to answer customers' questions rapidly so that they can get back on to whatever that they wanted to do, which is probably not spend time with you in a call center. So AI is incredibly pervasive. I think, there's lots of really interesting applications that are really being called into question now in terms of, is it ethical to use AI to, profile people or, just use technology that could recognize people's faces and start to try and identify that this is so-and-so without our rights as citizens to this. So it's a really interesting space. Blockchain is one that's still kind of emerging. I think perhaps lots of Kiwis who dabble in investments beyond saving have looked at cryptocurrency and they tend to associate the two as being one and the same, in particular Bitcoin. But the application for blockchain is remarkable. I think of a lot of public sector work in New Zealand at the moment. You take the firearms register, for example, you have a digital health pass or the vaccine digital pass. They could benefit from the application of a blockchain where you've got this immutable distributed ledger that should enable us to transact a hell of a lot faster, to record what's happening, and importantly, provide some level of trust that whatever it is that's on the blockchain is in fact what we hope it to be. I think one of the things I wanted to kind of pick up on, yes. I think all three of us on the panel, Ruth, we're all quite humble in terms of our knowledge of technology, and we're all saying that we're all business people, and we are, but I kind of also think that a master of digital transformation is someone that actually understands business and can understand when to apply technology to solve a particular problem. So it's really awesome to see lots of organizations today looking to hire people into C-suite level roles around transformation or director or heads of digital transformation, but you're also seeing the emergence of these specialties like cloud computing, as Rory was talking to, or the application of cognitive technology. So I think it's awesome to see lots of people who may have traditionally been in the workforce coming in through operations or finance now being asked to take on roles of responsibility where it involves transforming an organization. And it just so happens that digital technology is a key enabler.
Absolutely. And look, in line with what you were saying there as well, Ian, is, not only has this program actually been developed with industry in mind, but, you can do a search through Seek, and at the moment, there are so many roles out there which 10 years ago were, general management type roles. Guaranteed there's something in there about knowledge of digital technologies. And look, that kind of leads me to the next thing that I was keen for you guys to comment on, and that is around addressing challenges or addressing problems, because surely a lot of these technologies have come about because of challenges that have been hitting businesses. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about that. not just about the fact that COVID has hit us, and obviously a lot of us have had to rethink how we do things, but, you know, just in general terms around being more competitive, obviously our connections from a global standpoint as well. I might come back to you first, if that's okay. I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about some of the practical applications of some of these digital technologies? And, you know, if you've got any sort of projects you worked on, examples you can give us, that would be amazing too.
I think I'm allowed to mention this customer. Rory will know who it is. It's Vodafone New Zealand. And more recently, we've done some work with them in their network operating centre. And I'll resist talking about the tech and come back to why it is that they asked us to come in and help them. And that was because, you know, under Jason Paris's leadership, they're incredibly focused on providing great customer experience and making sure that there's a level of continuity and service uptime for their customers. So one of the ways in which, you know, they can do that is to look to automate as much as practically possible the network operating centre and some of the tasks that some of their very capable, intelligent, technical, telecommunications engineers are capable of doing, automating some of the very simple stuff that they had to do as part of their job. And then looking at applying AI on top of that automation to learn, as Midu was saying earlier, from some of the previous encounters around some of the data that they were analysing, and then starting to make decisions for them. And that, of course, is over a period of time, but it's not something that you can just turn everything upside down and suddenly launch within a couple of months. It's something that's an iterative process. You know, through what Midu was saying as well, if you apply, you know, design thinking, you know, you start to develop some hypotheses around what it is that you should do, and you start to validate the hypotheses. You then do some research as to, you know, what's feasible, you know, and also what's economically viable. And then you think about the desirability of the employee experience. So is this something that we should actually do? So it's that practice of design, prototyping what's possible using some, you know, really clever low and no code tools that are out there at the moment. You can pretty quickly start to release value. And I think, to pick up on Rory's earlier point around kind of securing, you know, funding to keep going, that incremental release of value is critical to how we run transformation projects today. So starting with a problem, quickly understanding it, framing it up, ideating, prototyping, testing, releasing, rinse and repeat.
I like that, rinse and repeat. That's an important part of that step as well. Look, I'm going to come across to Midu in a second. I don't know if you guys have had a chance, and while you're concentrating on your answers, just to have a look at some of the people that have joined us this evening. I can see people from Sydney and Melbourne, so outside of New Zealand. And actually, I just noted we've got a question which we'll come to shortly from someone even from Port Moresby. So that's lovely to see there as well. If anyone has got questions for these three guys, please go into the questions tab and pop your question in there, because we're going to come to them very quickly. Midu, I wonder if I can come to you next. Again, are you able to share with us maybe something around one of these technologies and how it's been able to address a challenge, any sort of practical application you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll just build on what Ian was talking about. So if we start talking about the whole chatbot virtual agent space, I think, you know, there's some really good examples around how what we term conversational AIs help companies, right? So I think a really good example is Mercury. You know, so let's talk about even pre-COVID, because sometimes it's good to talk about that. Ultimately, I guess, you know, before that, for them, customer service was something that they have kind of earmarked as one of their strategic advantages. And when they wanted to start looking at what that might be, I guess, you know, they do get a lot of calls into the call center. They are looking to be able to actually triage that a lot better, be 24/7, and be there with their, I guess, with their customers. Ultimately, I guess, you know, where AI was able, so we worked with them, and I think, you know, part of what was really cool with that was AI was able to be a companion to Mercury, so it didn't replace any of the call center staff that were there. But what it actually allowed them to do was, when people actually had questions to ask, they could go online, they could ask that chatbot, they could go to the IVR system. It would actually help address a lot of the triage to about an 88% sort of accuracy, so which I thought was really, really good. But what I loved about the inverse of that, because I guess, this is the advantages of using some of those technologies, not only did it, I guess, help the customer, but actually at the same time, it was reskilling some of the people who were in the call center, because it was in real time actually looking at what is the sentiment behind that and teaching them empathy as they go, so then they could make that a lot better. So I think, that's just a really practical application where something like conversational AI has actually been able to step in. They've addressed about 15,000 questions, and it's to a certain accuracy, and it allows the human touch to then be the differentiator, because for them, their whole strategy is around how do we actually become more empathetic to our customers? And I think that was an awesome place to start.
I love that. The human touch becomes the differentiator. I think that's a great difference to identify there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Rory, I'm going to come to you. Again, just looking for the same kind of thing around a practical application of some of these digital technologies. Have you got an example you can share with us?
Sure do, but I'd like to just add to that point that Midu made. A phrase that I hear in a few of my customers is digital first, human when it matters. And there are a few questions coming through that are related to the fact that, sometimes with digitization, jobs are lost and other jobs are created. So we'll get to that, I'm sure, when we get to the Q&A. I'll give you an example of a bank. I can't tell you which bank it is, but it's a New Zealand bank with a primary colour. So that gives you a choice, I think, of 4 and excludes 1. So you guys can make your own minds up. But, there were 2 or 3 areas that I was going to sort of talk to: user experience, agile delivery, and cloud. And so let me give you an example of one customer who's using all 3 of those capabilities to deliver an outcome. And I think, the key thing, like any project, and both Ian and Midu have touched on this, is, there's a problem to be solved. And if you don't know what that problem is, you're off to a bad start. Some people will just start digital because they think they need to be digital. Well, why? Let's work back from the problem to be solved. And the problem to be solved in this customer was very much in line with the user experience. So they wanted to simplify life for their bankers, reduce the number of systems and applications that they had to use, the number of interfaces that they had to navigate across. And to give you some context, large enterprises, even in New Zealand, a New Zealand bank will have 300 or 400 different applications that they use, and a large global enterprise may have 900 easily. So, that makes life very, very difficult. And so this bank determined that they were going to make the bankers' lives easier. And so UX effectively was the guiding philosophy for making those decisions. And then they started to move into, okay, well, how do we actually deliver this capability? They had 2 programs of work that they wanted to run, and they wanted to run them on the same platform. That's a big deal for any organization, to be thinking about doing 2 different things on one platform. Really, the only way to do that, in my experience, is to have a cloud platform. Now, again, you may want to build your own apps, but in their decision-making process, they decided that actually what they were doing wasn't that secret or special. It was very standard banking capabilities. So they went and decided to get some products that you would call out of the box or off the shelf. One for loan origination. So, I want a loan. Here's how we go through the process of giving you the money. And the other one was for very basic pipeline and opportunity management, which is standard to any organization. So that's not differentiating. How you do it is differentiating, but the capability in its own right is not. And so they determined that was the approach they would take. They'd buy software as a service to deliver these 2 capabilities. And the only way they can do that is on cloud. So immediately you've got user experience and cloud computing coming in. Then finally, well, how did they decide to do that? How could they run 2 major pieces of work on one platform at the same time quickly? Because if they did them sequentially, back to that waterfall statement at the beginning that I made, they'd still be doing this in 3 years' time. And that's actually how Agile came around. It's because tech projects are taking a minimum of 3 years from idea to execution. And so basically they split the 2 projects into 2 teams. They've got around 150 people on those. And many of them are technologists, but many of them are business people as well. It's led by a tribe lead who is absolutely a business person. They barely know about technology, but they are guided by skilled and capable team members, and they're good at rallying them. And so they've split those up. The squads are about 8 to 12 people. They've got them running in 2 weekly sprints in parallel. Some people are doing integration, other people are doing, and you mentioned it, Midu, low code work. And that's one of the beauties of a software as a service platform, is that you can go low code. And I don't know if anyone else has been watching Lego Masters over the last 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, but I look at Lego Masters and I go, that is the perfect example of, in fairness, a high effort way of using Lego, but they design and build some absolutely beautiful and amazing things. And that's great. But actually, for most people, they could get the result pretty quickly by following the instructions and using the stuff out of the box. And would probably prefer to start with a box and instructions rather than the gigantic wall of Lego that they're faced with there. And, you know, to touch on another point around the number of people in the market, Ruth, you mentioned that, you know, lots of digital transformation roles. Right now, there are between 13 and 1,400 roles for software engineers. So if you think of your software engineers as your Lego masters, there's a lot of people looking for them. And so you might be want to really work on the low code way of putting your Lego together. And that's what this bank have done. They've gone, yep, we're going to take the easier approach to actually get the result faster, because we know we can add flavor to it and make it different for us and how we deliver it. But the actual concept and capability we're delivering is relatively standard to most banks. So they're cracking through that. They migrated about 200 million records over the weekend, and they'll go live next week.
I'm impressed with how well you managed to integrate Lego Masters into your conversation there, Rory.
You can't talk about software and not talk about Lego.
Everyone's talking about it anyway. Before I head over to the questions, and I'm really pleased to say we've actually got some great questions here. Ian and Midu, did you have anything final things you want to say before we look at some of these questions? No? Let's crack into them, huh? So Mike Schmidt is actually the gentleman from Port Moresby. It was the first name that came up here. He's asked the question here. So what are we going to do about all those people with an IQ of 80 or lower, say 10% of the population, whose jobs are going to be replaced and no suitably simple new jobs will be created for this disadvantaged group? Now, this is something we hear a lot of in tertiary education, is a fear that people are going to be replaced. Do you see that as being a statement that's true? Are we concerned about that, do you think? Yep.
I might chip in with a quick answer on that one, Ruth. And I think absolutely jobs will be lost as jobs will be created as well. At the very bottom end, I guess, of that intellectual spectrum, where you know, it's probably someone doing a more manual role. I guess we could go back 200-300 years to the Industrial Revolution. That is going to happen. It's not going to change. I think for me, there's probably a bigger role for companies like ours and Datacom and IBM to share knowledge and help upskill people. And if I can just reference a piece of work that IDC did actually for Salesforce globally, and they then localized that for New Zealand. Their estimate is that within the Salesforce ecosystem, so partners like IBM and Datacom, customers that use us and ourselves, that there are something like 26,000 jobs in the next 5 years that could be created in that ecosystem alone. So I'm not suggesting that the more manual labour, perhaps end of a spectrum, can immediately gravitate to those roles, but there's certainly opportunities for people to learn where maybe their knowledge-based roles are being replaced by these kind of technologies.
I wanted to pick up on just part of this question here, and forgive me, Mike, if this is not entirely what you meant, but framing around this IQ thing is, you know, I'm just wondering, are we worried that we're not bright enough to deal with some of these technologies? Should we be worried? Be really keen to get your feedback on that. I mean, is it hard? Is it or are these the sorts of things that as people that working in, a modern, environment, today's environment, that actually, we just got to get on board and start learning? And how do we go about doing that?
Sorry, Ian, did you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Midu. I wasn't sure if that was a question back for Michael. If we can
I don't know if it was a question. But, I was just curious around the IQ required for some of these technologies.
I'll try and go quickly. I think I've done a transformation project locally, and one of the really encouraging things is that we brought in a subject matter expert from the call centre, and she may have entered the team as someone that could guide us in terms of how to serve customers quickly and give them the right outcomes. We quickly asked her, based on her ability and how easy she was to work with, whether or not she'd be interested in becoming a conversational UI designer. So a total shift from what she was employed to do in that organisation to someone that could actually design experiences for people with chatbots, which we thought was really cool. I do agree, it's a concern. And as Rory was saying, IBM and Datacom and Salesforce, we all have a responsibility in the space to play. And I can't talk for Salesforce or Datacom, but IBM have introduced a number of certifications that are freely available on platforms like Coursera. They're designed for new-collar workers, and it's to upskill them for use with, to become comfortable in some of these technologies like cloud computing and so on. And more locally, there's a bit of a bun fight on LinkedIn today. We posted that our Salesforce practice in New Zealand is growing, which we thought was really cool. We invited people who are looking for a fresh challenge to, let us know and get in touch. And someone piped up and said, rather than kind of cannibalizing the existing Salesforce practitioners out there, what are we doing to try and train a bunch of people to come through? And I think, this problem that we've got relies on a number of partnerships between industry, tertiary providers like Media Design School, and also secondary schools as well, to make sure we get people at grassroots level, get more females, get more Māori and Pacifica in New Zealand at least, entering into this technology market and serving the communities that need to be served by technology. So that's kind of what we're doing locally in this space anyway. Over to you, Midu.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just build on what Ian was saying, I guess, first off, might even address your point. I think, look, undoubtedly, that's the unfortunate part of what's happening, right? But I think also, the hope and the opportunity is, and this maybe addresses Hussein's question as well, which is the opportunity with every transformation program that we're running is how do we actually take a slightly more human aspect to it? Because, at the end of the day, like, getting into technology sometimes can be quite a far stretch if you've not been in that space. And a big part of that is kind of creating the stage so people can do that. So, I mean, similar to what Ian was saying, one of the initiatives that I've been lucky to be part of with Datacom and Media Design School, actually, is we've created this program called TalentX. And essentially what it does is people who are either underrepresented in technology or haven't had a go in that before, or young creatives who actually want to move into that sort of space, it allows them to get a taste. So one of the things that we do is every year we kind of run a big annual hackathon here in New Zealand where we have about 400, 500 people turn up. As part of that, we actually invite TalentX to come in, and that's actually sometimes a really good space to just get a taste for, is this even a space that I can go into? Because I think often when we talk about IT creativity, you don't realize how broad it is, because it's not about the IQ. Some people can be really analytical. Some people can be really creative. Some people can be quite technical. And actually, it's just about showcasing that there's different pathways. And I think from there, then it's how do you add the pastoral care that goes around it to build it up? And I think that's more and more what we can all focus as an industry on, building into these transformation programs, because it's coming. And I think, as New Zealand, we've got to realize that we are a small population. And at the end of the day, we all, if we've got that many jobs, there's a scarcity, and borders are closed. You're not going to import that many people in. So the more active things we can participate in to do reskilling programs, and that's why it's great to see Pips on this call as well. But I mean, I think the more of that sort of stuff that we can do, the better that is.
Excellent. Thank you, Midu. Actually, I will come to Pip's question here as well. She's got here, how do you sell the value of tools like design thinking and agile ways of working that require a certain amount of speed into organizations and that are more risk adverse and glacial moving, like, for example, local government and public health?
I think that's for you, Rory, is it?
Well, I think you guys will have plenty to say around the value of design thinking and agile ways of working, but I will say that we've got an amazing example in our own country at the moment of public health moving really, really fast. So we've all been involved in it. We've seen it. It's worked in some ways very well, in other ways not quite so well, typically less the technology and more the scale, and I'm referring to quarantine there. But between the MIQ and quarantine applications, the vaccine register, the Book My Vaccine approach, the Ministry of Health for big public health organisations moved really fast, and they've had to do that, I'm sure, in an agile way. I'm not really close to that project, but whilst in the public we may roll our eyes and go, well, why didn't you do it that way? I think anyone that's been close to government and certainly close to the Ministry of Health is looking at what they're pushing out, the volume and the pace, and it's quite unbelievable. And it absolutely goes back to the principles we've been talking about, which is they could not have done that if they weren't doing it on cloud, because they couldn't have easily then mobilized that so that a car park in Manurewa has got someone actually putting your details straight into an iPad or a phone or onto a computer in the same way that they are in Green Lane or in Wellington or in Queenstown. So that's an example of public health doing that fast. But I think Pip's question is more around specifically those techniques that typically do rely on doing things quickly. And I wonder if Midu or Ian, you've got some examples that are better to answer those points.
Yeah, look, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but and I'm not trying to be clever with this response, Pip, but what's the greater risk? Investing in something that actually has no desirability for who you're building it for, because no one bothered to talk to the employee or the customer or the citizen in this case. And that, yeah, unfortunately, design thinking can be expensive in terms of time. Like, lots of people would just like to perhaps drop a system in and just get it up and running, but there is a risk that you can really miss the mark if you actually don't understand the people that you're doing this for. So that's often the kind of counter to that question around should we be doing design or not. Midu?
And I mean, I think, again, building on that, I mean, I've very recently been working with 7 local government authorities across, and I think, I totally get like where they're coming from. Like at the end of the day, because they're spending taxpayers' money, they have to be very critical about how they're actually going about it, right? So I totally get where that risk-averse nature kind of comes from it. I think what I also get from that is often they all actually think by working together, there is a big thing to come out of it. And I think that's where, if we sometimes stop calling it design thinking and agile, even though that's the practices that we use, and we actually start taking it back to something around value and something tangible, then suddenly it starts de-risking what we're actually trying to approach, right? So I think often in a lot of the sort of work that we do, it's a lot about how do you, we talk a lot about how do you kind of paint the artist's impression first and then work it back to the photograph so that you can start actually going to the future. Actually, there's something to grab a hold of so you can go, that's what I'm actually going to get. And then we can tire through, because, it's true. Nothing's ever going to be finished in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, as agile as you get. But ultimately, if we do use some of those methods, then a vision or something tangible that you can see, I think we should always place a premium on that because it makes it a lot more real. And even in that sector, I've certainly found a lot of success from it because it de-risks the decision-making process.
Yeah. And I think it gets back to what everyone's been talking about here around making sure that you understand the problem really well before you venture into it. And sometimes that can really take time. We know that. So, look, I'm conscious of time, and there is one more question I will come to, even though there's some other amazing questions in here. What we will endeavour to do with those of you who are on this, if we haven't come to your question, is we will come back to you with some answers after this event. But the next one I just wanted to go to very quickly was actually Jennifer George has posted something here, which I really want to answer, because she's mentioned here that we've mostly been talking from the perspective of large public companies. And I think in fairness to everyone here, it would be really great to find out what the biggest challenges are for medium and smaller firms and how they can be assisted. So I'm really keen to get your insights on that. And that'll probably be our final question this evening.
All waiting for one
That's
of the
right.
others to go first. I'm timing out, guys. I'm timing out to give you an opportunity to speak.
We said someone was going to do that. So it's what are the biggest challenges for medium and smaller firms, and how can they be assisted?
Midu, I'm happy to go first if you like, or I can always go first before you.
Just jump in.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, like a large organisation, small, medium, they're constrained in terms of what resources they have at their disposal, be it people or funding. A common question that's surfacing in the question list here as well is, where do we start? What's going to give us the biggest return on investment and so on. And every organisation is different, unfortunately. For some people who are running the business, they might see that, retaining customers is their biggest problem right now because there's a competitor that's entering the market or needing to differentiate on something else like environmental sustainability, etc. So they're all different. I think, one of the things I personally like about design thinking is that you're trying to take the ego out of the decision-making process. You're trying to be transparent. And often what we do when we talk to a new client opportunity around approaching transformation is we actually leave technologists out of the room. I hope there's no technology clients on this call. And we get the business people together. And that way we quickly suss out where the agendas are and what we need to do to gain alignment. And we tease out from them what they think their biggest problems are. And importantly, what would the outcome be for their organisation if they solved it for a customer, an employee, or a citizen? And that starts to get the conversation going around alignment and where they should focus their limited resources. So yeah, sadly, I can't say it's this one thing, Jennifer, but everyone has their own little level of pain, be them a small, medium, or large organisation. I guess it's the scale of it that's probably the differentiator. Midu?
I mean, I think you've answered all of it. I guess I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but I mean, one of the points that I'd like to make, having come from running my own or a small organization through to then going back into corporate and that sort of thing, is absolutely scale as always. That's the thing, because every dollar counts where you put it and how do you invest it, and you don't have as much freedom to go and research and do stuff. But one of the things that I think that definitely comes across is how do you actually apply ecosystem thinking to what you're doing, because often it's not just your challenge. There's actually lots of, if I guess anything we've learned from these last 20 months, it's like the power of coming together. So if at all, I would kind of say when you're in that small to medium sized sort of space, well, you actually have the opportunity to look at what are some bigger challenges that we're both facing and how can we learn off each other. And people are more than generous to give their time. I know when I was in that space, as much as you're working around the clock, you're doing all that sort of stuff, actually just reaching out sometimes is a great thing. And actually having a strategy around, as part of your digital transformation, around what's the ecosystem I'm going to form around myself to help us address some of the challenges, is definitely something that I think is quite helpful. And it doesn't have to be, this big thought out strategy. It's actually, these are some of the things we address in market. Who are the partners we could potentially work with? And that's how you tackle the big things.
Thank you, Midu. Look, we're going to, sorry, Rory, you've got your hand up. You go ahead. Add to that.
Only if there's time, Ruth. Only if there's time.
Go for it.
So couple of things. I've also, worked in small businesses and big businesses too. And there was just an observation I wanted to share, and it's based around a bit of work done by a guy called Dundas. He was an anthropologist, and he worked out that humans can only really keep about 100 close relationships in their head at any one time. And that translates organizationally to a pivot from businesses being big, small businesses to being small, big businesses. And once you start to be a small, big business, and that's probably around 100, 120 people, you really need to be thinking about systemization. And so digital transformation is going to be much more, in my observation, about how do we create systems and processes that really deliver value to the people in the business and the customers. I think when you're smaller than that, you can take your digital transformation more in a sort of a problem by problem approach. So, you know, your initial problem might just be, could I work from my phone if I had to? If that's my problem, then let's go away and solve for that. Let's make sure all my key systems that I need to run my business I can do from my phone. That's digital transformation in a small business. And so, it's, you know, I think it's violently agreeing with Ian and Midu that you've got to work out what problem you're trying to solve. Thank you, Dunbar, not Dundas, if anyone's looking it up. Thank you. Thanks for that, Mike. It's come up in the chat if no one else can see that. That's great. There's nothing like being live corrected by the chat feed. Brilliant. So yeah, I think the point being it's totally down to your business as to where to start. But everyone that's doing anything with technology is digitally transforming.
That's a really good point to actually end on, Rory. And look, I think one of the things that was said at the very beginning of this session was, you know, this is a 3 to 5 year journey, and you're not always going to get it right. I think someone mentioned it'll succeed 25% of the time. Look, one of the other messages I got in this, and especially in light of the feedback that was given around needing, you know, an IQ or maybe some fear around learning about some of these new technologies and the way the world is changing, is that the human touch is actually still the differentiator. So there we go. So I think there's some really key messages. Look, we are really fortunate at Midu Design School. We're launching our Master of Digital Transformation next month. It's the first one of its kind in New Zealand. And what's so different about the program is that it's actually being developed by industry. In fact, these 3 guys on the call today were involved in helping us create what's in the program itself. So it's being created by industry, and it's really focusing on working adults. So so much of this is about keeping ahead of the game. So much of this is about future-proofing your career. We do know that jobs are changing and changing really rapidly, but the reality is that a course like this, it's not for you to become an expert in AI, it's not for you to become an expert in blockchain, etc. It's actually about having an awareness of what is available so you can make really good business decisions. So starting on the 8th of November is our first component that we're rolling out. No surprises to you, I'm sure. It's called Digital Transformation, surprise. But it's actually going to be taught by industry people who will be sharing and imparting their knowledge. And I have a feeling these 3 guys on the call might get the call around, would you like to be a guest speaker? Because you've spoken so well to us today, and people have commented in the chat, you know, putting some of these things in layman terms for us so that we have an understanding is really, really important, really important. So I would like to thank all of our panelists, you 3 guys, Midu, Ian, Rory, been really amazing. And look, the questions are still coming through and lots of comments about how wonderful you guys are. Thank you very much to the participants on this call and for wonderful questions that you've actually sent through. Most of you have stuck to it all the way through. You can see we could have talked for much longer on the topic. I think it just highlights we might need to do this again real soon. So thank you very much, everyone. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.